Hey guys, and welcome to our episode today on the Pathway Show. Today I'm happy to have with me Dan Goldfield. And Dan Goldfield he's one of the many people that I've met on X for a while ago. I think we first connected in October last year, or maybe it was November. I haven't been on X for too long, but you were one of the first people that was drawn to, and especially around your specialty, around your interest around meditation and spirituality and building an online business. So I'm truly happy to be here with you, and I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to have.
Me too, my friend. Me too. It's great to finally connect with you.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell me something more about you to the audience? What do they need to know about you?
Sure. So I began my life as the little boy who was asking why, and those big why questions followed me all the way to the end of my 20s, where finally I felt I started to get some answers. The short version of this story being that I met a gentleman who lived as a Theravada monk for 8 years. We spoke for hundreds and hundreds of hours. I went to visit him in Thailand, and then I visited with some other teachers as well. Thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of mindfulness practice, and finally freed myself of all the trouble that I was causing myself, that I'd really gotten to the bottom of what can feel like a deep, deep hit of emotional baggage. Though I sense that you've some experience in your own practice, brother, and for those of our friends who are listening in as well, who are experienced in their practice, then they'll know what I mean when I say it never really existed. It was all an illusion. It was all a dream. But I really believed in that dream. And so for as long as I was clinging on to it, I was suffering. I was dissatisfied. And so that's been the great journey of my life, has been the one from dissatisfaction to the lack thereof. And it was then that I turned my attention to sharing what I'd learned and experienced with others, which is what brought me online about 18 months ago. And I've been here ever since, having conversations like this all day.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dan. So I want to go deep immediately into the meditation practice and into your experience so far working and first learning from your teachers and then practicing yourself. What is meditation? What is mindfulness? And is there a difference between the two?
I define it like this, brother. Meditation is the dedication of distraction-free time to the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of seeing clearly. That's how I like to talk about it. And so one of the things that first teacher of mine, who I spent all that wonderful time with, was very keen on, was this matter of dissolving the boundary between meditation and non-meditation. And I really took to this. I really liked this idea when I first heard it because it made a lot of sense to me, just on the basis of reasoning. This teacher of mine said to me, hey, if there's something good going on when you sit to meditate formally, why not see if we can have that good thing going all the time? Or to put it in more accurate terms, why don't we see if we can have that absence of bad things going on all the time? And so I set my heart to that. And what I found was my sitting practice became somewhat like the training wheels. I would sit and I would learn about the mind and myself and what was going on, the ways in which I was causing myself dissatisfaction. And then I would tentatively, gingerly move into daily life, seeing if I could maintain, and I put that in big air quotes for reasons that you may be aware of, we can certainly discuss. What it felt like at the time was that I was maintaining something. It felt like I was building something up in sitting practice and then trying to maintain that as I went on through my daily activities. What I realized as that practice progressed was that actually it was flipped. It was rather the absence of things that I'd been doing all of my life mental fabrications, conditionings, habits that was leading to that improved condition, shall we say. And so it flipped at some point then from a maintenance to actually what I need to do is just not start up all of those mental fabrications that I've become so habituated to that have been causing me all this trouble throughout my life. It took a lot of practice to see that dynamic that, this isn't something additive, it's subtractive. This is a major problem for practitioners because we're all so climatized to our suffering, to our dissatisfaction. We're all so used to the ways in which we cause ourselves trouble. But that flip was profound. That was a really important insight for me. And that's how I would talk about and illustrate the difference between meditation and mindfulness. That mindfulness is that continuous looking that leads to the kind of insight that we really want, which is what's real in all circumstances, what's the basis of all of my experience. Not just where is it that I'm causing myself trouble when I sit formally, where is it I'm causing myself trouble throughout my entire life. And then we're really cooking. And that's what unlocked for me that deeper insight about additive versus subtractive models of awakening.
So what were some of the ways in which you were giving yourself trouble? Because I'm thinking that, when you sit on the cushion or the chair, whatever you sit to meditate, or if you have focused mindfulness, as you so beautifully put it, and you do your breathing, you do your scanning, whatever practice you're devoted to, right, to doing, and you're introspecting, because I think that's a part of everything, of all traditions, I think. What were some of the things that you were noticing that, okay, I'm doing these things and they're not helpful. They're causing me suffering. Now, I know attachment is an important concept in this tradition, but perhaps you could put it in your own words. If I were to sit on the cushion and start meditating, giving this practice some time every day, various things would happen, obviously, but I might also notice that I am causing myself trouble in different ways. What were some of the ways in which you were causing yourself trouble and suffering?
I was being very mean to myself. There was a lot of self-berating going on. I would tell myself off, reviewing, say, some past experience of the past day, week, month, year. I would recall that experience and tell myself off for behaving in a certain way. Why did you behave like that? You're such a fool. How embarrassing. Do better next time. That very stern voice, which is, in a sense, installed into so many of us by traditional methods of parenting and schooling. The process of socialization really could be described as that installing of the adult's voice into the child's head so that the adult can finally leave the child alone and trust that they'll tell themselves off. Of course, we all want for our children not to run into traffic, but my feeling is we go too far with installing this voice such that the child ends up being mean to themselves. And this appears to be the only way. Speaking about mainstream culture here, and of course making a generalization, it's not that I was never praised as a child, far from it, but that berating voice was the primary voice in my head. So that was one thing that I noticed. I stressed myself out a lot, Gabriel. I would worry about things that were upcoming. So there was anxiety, there was social anxiety. Goodness me, the amount of times that I would replay conversations in my head, kind of checking over what I had said, checking over the way that I had behaved with people to see, is it acceptable? Was it good enough? And of course, this is just an arbitrary standard that I was placing upon my own interactions with people. I would replay work engagements in my head. And again, not for any particularly constructive purpose. Rather more actually to find where I'd done something wrong. And then again comes that self-berating. There was a lot of low self-worth. There was a lot of not feeling good enough, a lot of efforting to try to impress people. In fact, that was the major motivation for my first career as a musician, really, was to try to impress people. That was my major motivation. So those are the things that are top of mind. I'm sure there was more.
Yeah, so you speak about memories of the past, and you talk about worrying about the future. And those are things we cannot control, right? We have no control over the past, nor can we we cannot change the past, nor can we control the future. It's only the present moment that's available to us, and so on. And I'm curious about, you may have these insights when you sit and you meditate, and you're noticing that these are ways. I'm not actually being very mean to myself, right? But how do you change those words? How do you catch yourself? How do you change that internal voice? Is it just with enough practice? Because insight is one thing, but I'm thinking that habits, the inner voice, the inner script that we may have, all of us have in one way or another. It can be, well, I think it's the parental voice, the teacher's voice, as you said, for sure. But once we have reached the insight, how do we move forward from there? Talking about the future now.
Insight that's powerful enough does have the function of collapsing those habitual patterns. But of course, insight comes in infinite flavors. And so we may have an insight that's just, oh, I see that this is just a habitual pattern, but it's still running. Right? So what do we do in that case? Well, this gives us more opportunity, brother, to explore that distinction between additive models of awakening and subtractive models of awakening. Right? And we could really draw a line. It's not this simple, but for the sake of illustration, we could draw a line down the middle of all wisdom traditions ever recorded and say they fall into one of these two camps. Some traditions will recommend that we develop good qualities. Other traditions will say good qualities are your default mode, they're your natural state, and so actually all we're doing is we're dissolving bad qualities. Right? For the first, I would say 3/4 of my journey, I was involved in something that was leaning more to the side of the additive model. And in that model, the recommendation was to change what's going on in the mind deliberately. Change a bad thought to a good thought, an unwholesome thought to a wholesome thought. So practicing that model, I would see that self-berating voice arise, and it would kind of feel like playing a game of whack-a-mole. The way it was recommended to me was delightful. This teacher of mine was so light-hearted with it, and it was a wonderful practice. We would kind of call out, I see you. I see you. That berating voice that's trying to tell me off, that's doing me no good. And in seeing it in that way, of course, we make it object rather than continuing to take it to be subject. Whilst it's subject, it's me, right? I'm immersed in that experience of I am that voice that's telling myself off. Right? This is actually insanity, as we see when we look closely enough that there's not even one self, much less is there two. And so the idea that there could be a me who is telling another me off is just crazy talk. But these are the kinds of knots that we tie ourselves into. And so that was the first way that I approached this. During that latter quarter of my journey, I was much more taken with the subtractive models of awakening. So this was where I encountered properly for the first time the non-dual tradition, teachings like Dzogchen from Tibet, Advaita Vedanta from India. Zen is non-dual in its leaning. There's Taoism, has some non-dual flavor to it. And when I heard the possibility, brother, that I was okay by my nature, and that I didn't have to do anything in order to whip myself into shape. First of all, that was a dilemma for me because I'd spent so long trying to cultivate and develop these good qualities. There was perhaps a little sunk cost fallacy going there. Spent so long practicing in this way. Could it be that I could drop all of that? Well, as I continued to contemplate this, that possibility became too good to ignore. I said, I don't know what the truth is, but I need to find out. If it's true that I am by my nature good and kind and compassionate and wise and effective, I want to know before I dedicate a lifetime to this practice of cultivation and development, is there a way for me to confirm or deny one way or the other? Could I at least get a little confirmation? And what I found was that once I started practicing on those terms, very quickly everything started to unravel. Now, that may well have been supported by that long period of cultivation practice that I had done. I knew very well how to meditate at that time. I knew how to be mindful at that time. And so then taking the simple instruction to rest naturally without seeking or describing anything, this wonderful instruction from Tibet, I just rested and rested and rested until there was nothing left to relax out of. And that was my answer. So there's two distinct ways that we might approach this issue of an unwholesome mind stream, shall we say. These days, my recommendations to students that I work with are essentially based on how well are they able to access that simple path of natural rest? How well are they able to simply relax in all circumstances? Depending on how stuck the student feels is how many or how much of a deliberate practice I will then prescribe. The example I like to give is to tell someone in the throes of addiction to rest naturally without seeking or describing anything would be terrible advice, right? That person needs intervention. First of all, probably from other people, but then usually from themselves. They have to make an intervention within themselves to start to forcefully replace some of those old patterns. And this is why often we see people suffering with addiction become quite religious, right? In AA, of course, a lot of people become Christian, and they really become Christian, right? And that's good. In a sense, they're replacing one attachment with another. And of course, an attachment to God is much more favorable than an attachment to alcohol, right? But then what we would hope to see is that that person may actually progress to let go of their attachment to God as well. Indeed, to let go of their attachment to anything in the end. And so we're in this wonderful position here in 2024 where we have this incredible overview of all of the wisdom practices that have ever been recorded. And so we can look out over all of this and say, well, what's the ultimate context for all of this stuff? If we take everything that ever worked, is there a model that we can create then that is like a synthesis of all of these that says, hey, sometimes a deliberate practice is necessary. Sometimes a practice of cultivation is necessary. Sometimes deliberately replacing one thought with another is the perfect prescription. Other times we can cut right to the chase, as it were, and say, I'm just going to drop everything. And in the case that a student can really run with that, then that's the fastest way to drop one's attachment.
Something that comes to my mind are several things that I was thinking about when you were talking, and as I was listening to you. The distinction that you make between the subtractive and the additive traditions, right? It's almost like you're describing the anthropology of the religious traditions in the West, so the Christian traditions. not only in the East. So if you look at the anthropology, theological anthropology of, I have a background in theology, I have a PhD in theology,
Right.
of the Eastern churches. So you have the Armenian Orthodox, the Syriac Orthodox, the Coptic Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, that Eastern tradition. And as well as some of the Catholic traditions, or Roman Catholic tradition, would say that we're wounded, and this woundedness does not mean that we're bad. We are fundamentally good. We're fundamentally good, and but we are whole, and but then we have habits that actually hurt us. But we have within ourselves a tendency to heal, a tendency to transcend, a tendency to, I'm going to use their language now, to discover that God is not somewhere outside, but God is within. And the attachment you talk about when it comes to God, they would agree that you should not be attached to God, because any attachment to God is to reduce God to something you understand, and God is mystery. It cannot be understood. God is only in the negative, it's not in the positive. God is not ultimately something or someone you can say this is who God is, only what is not. And then you have some traditions later on. And I think that the reason why we have this tendency in humanity in general, I think because of what I'm saying this is because there seems to be a human tradition or a human experience about this. We look out in the world, in ourselves, when we sit on the cushion, or we simply look at the world, and we notice that there's a lot of shit going on in this world. So there has to be something wrong with us, right? On the surface level, there has to be something wrong with us. And when we think as you did, you notice that you're berating yourself as well. You're not being kind to yourself. You're not being compassionate towards yourself. You're noticing that you actually are kicking your own butt. And so you have a tradition also in the West, in the Christian traditions, that would say that we're lost. We need the intervention of something divine, and the divine has to almost crack open humanity in order for it to be saved. That's how extreme some people would say. How certain people would say. And then I would also say, like, something that comes to my mind when you talk about the mindfulness practice and the non-dual tradition and the dual tradition, and also something I think about, like when you think about the thoughts, when you have those thoughts and you're attached to the thoughts, and once you learn, sit to meditate, you're noticing that, okay, there are these thoughts that are going on inside of my head. They're running on the stream of consciousness. They're running. They have expressions in my body. I have sensations of constriction and usually accompanying thoughts and so on. And once you notice that I'm not those thoughts, and you even say I am not those thoughts, on some level, I think on the first level you would be able to say that these thoughts are happening. They're part of my psychic processes, or the processes that I have in my psyche, and they're not helpful. They're not useful. And I can notice that these things are happening. I don't have to be attached to them. The most powerful practice you could do would be to just beam the light of consciousness on these thoughts. And then you notice, okay, they're just happening. And not I, perhaps, but my body, my entire existence is the context where these things are happening. So how do you go from that dualism to the non-dual tradition? Like, how do you not make the distinction intellectually understand, but how do you make the experiential insight that this thought is just consciousness, and it's not
Me,
just,
I
it is
had
consciousness.
to, yeah, sorry, brother, do you have more to say?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's wonderful to hear you speak, brother. For me, I had to hear from someone who demonstrated this truth very powerfully. This is a wonderful teacher I'm bringing to mind now. Her name is Ziji Rinpoche. This is a Tibetan given name. She was born an American lady named Candice O'Denver. She teaches Dzogchen in the lineage of a wonderful teacher named Wangdo Rinpoche. And I found a group of hers meeting here in Bristol. She was never there. She has international groups. So I've never actually sat with this teacher. But the people that she had trained were wonderful. and they would play videos of her, and I listened to hundreds of hours of talks by this wonderful teacher, Ziji Rinpoche. And she is so convicted and uncompromising in her presentation of non-duality, which I really needed actually to shake me out of, so to speak, that developmental model that I'd been in for years at that point. What I discovered as I listened to and opened to Ziji Rinpoche's teaching was that I had, in a sense, transferred my worldly efforting to my spiritual practice. I suspect you've heard of this happening before, brother, right? This is very common, where previously it was, I'm going to be the best drummer in the world. Then it became, I'm going to be the best mindfulness practitioner in the world. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get enlightened, right? We're in the territory of the spiritual ego here. When I heard Ziji Rinpoche's teaching, that was one of the first insights I had was, I'm really efforting here. I'm really trying to do something. Where do I think I'm going? What do I think I'm trying to achieve here? And ideas of non-duality were not completely new to me. I'd spent some time listening to Rupert Spiro, a wonderful Advaita teacher. Adyashanti teaches from a non-dual perspective a lot of the time. And so I just started to experiment. Well, what would happen if I stopped that practice and instead just relaxed? And what I found was that all the joy that I'd been trying to cultivate was right there in the absence of the efforting. Now, it's always interesting to me to consider the role of that developmental practice up to that point. I think I could say fairly confidently that if I'd heard Ziji Rinpoche's teaching as a novice, it would have made no sense to me whatsoever. So it's interesting to consider, isn't it? And this is why I'm always looking to give a personalized curriculum to a student who comes to me based on where they're at and what they can understand, what they can access. But that was the experiential shift for me, brother, was the dropping of efforting all at once, any worldly efforting that was remaining, and all this spiritual efforting that I was doing, and it felt like putting down a great load. Finally, I can rest. This is what I was looking for the whole time, this relief. And finally, I see in my own experience, it's not about doing. The doing is the whole problem. The doing is what got me into this mess. And of course, in Western culture, we're so conditioned toward doing. We value non-doing so little, but I was ready for it. And so in experimenting, had that experiential shift that, I don't have to try anymore. And then I just followed that all the way home.
How do you make compatible, or how do you, because you're building an online business at the same time as you're practicing mindfulness, and you're talking about how resting in simply being. You say that's what you were looking for, but that's what you found. That's what you are. That's where you are. And simply not searching for anything, not trying to, simply being with whatever is, right? How can you merge the two of both seeking something, having goals? Like I have a goal too. I have several goals. Also building online business, counseling business online, where I'm teaching people. Both I'm offering counseling with inspiration from mindfulness. So I use ACT therapy, so acceptance and commitment therapy, which is very closely related to mindfulness, right? Very, very inspired by that. And at the same time, teaching students, clients to that, you can also heal yourself. You have those tendencies within yourself. You just need the tools and somebody to guide you, and a presence, and a calm presence, and a person who can help you reparent yourself, essentially. And once you're up and going, you can actually do this on your own. You don't need to invest millions or thousands of dollars or euros or pounds into therapy for years, for example. It's not necessary. For some, maybe it is, but I don't think it's for all, not necessary. So how are those two ideas compatible? To learn how to be with what is, and at the same time, plan for the future, make goals, have a vision, build a business, or anything else that you may aspire to do.
Yeah, I struggled with this one for a long time, brother, and I'll always remember a question that I asked that first teacher of mine. I said to him, if this Buddha dude was completely satisfied, didn't want for anything, didn't need anything, wasn't attached to anything, why did he walk thousands of miles up and down India giving all these teachings? Why did he do that? And this teacher of mine said, he did that because he saw that it was wise. He saw that it was beneficial. He saw that it was good and compassionate. He said to me, you know, Dan, there are more reasons to do things than because you're feeling bad and you want to stop feeling bad. And I couldn't even compute that at the time that I heard it, brother. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. I could not imagine what it was like to do an act just because it was good, just because I'd discerned that it was beneficial for myself or others or both. I only knew motivation in the negative. I only knew motivation as a trying to get away from. I feel anxious, so I'd better do this. I feel guilty, so I'd better do that. And so it was years after I heard that story that I finally relaxed enough to essentially get to the bottom of it, meaning get to the bottom of the trying, the contrived doing. I also remember from Ram Dass, someone asked him one time, you know, how do you know if a motivation is genuine? And Ram Dass said, well, just lie down. This fella said, what? He said, just lie down. Eventually you'll have to get up and go to the toilet. Like, you'll do something. And then just let that continue to happen. He said, why are you so afraid that if you stop doing shit from here, you'll go wrong somewhere? And I was very afraid that I would go wrong if I weren't constantly whipping myself into shape. And again, that came right over into my spiritual practice in those earlier stages. I remember being terrified that if I let go of control, I would just end up at the bar all day, every day. That I would basically become a degenerate. And so I played a long game of chicken with myself, essentially. I said, well, can I relax out of this attachment and we'll see what happens? And then I'd get scared and start controlling again. And then maybe a couple of weeks later, I'd try again until I realized finally, no, it's safe. I can just allow myself to be however I want to be, and then trust that genuine motivations will arise. Now, this got so extreme that during one of the COVID lockdowns, I relaxed for almost a year. And this was a great opportunity for any of us who are deep into a spiritual practice. I'm sure lots of practitioners used that time to really just go deeply into whatever practice they were doing. For me, that just looked like putting absolutely no obligations on myself. Zero obligation. And so I was very quiet for a year. I didn't speak to many people. And then it was speaking to a fellow practitioner one time who said to me, why don't you just start sharing the shit that we talk about online? I was really at the point where I was saying to him, you know, I'm not sure if I'll ever do anything again. I really feel like I could just live out my entire life right here. I'm perfectly satisfied. And he said, well, that's good for you. There's 7.9999 billion others out there. Going to maybe do something for them. I said, that's a great idea, actually. So I went home and wrote out a list of topics that I could write or speak on that was as long as my arm, just thinking about all the things that he and I would kind of chew on together.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of my online outreach.
Do you love yourself? Why and how? How did you discover that? From berating yourself to loving yourself.
Mm. Well, the why, if there is one, I think is because we all are loved and are deserving of love. Every single one of us, no matter what evil deeds we have done. That doesn't mean we should demolish all the prisons and not have people take responsibility for our actions. It means they're deserving of love whilst they're being despicable. That's a difficult one to put together if any of our listeners haven't explored this territory before. This is one of those paradoxes that kind of lie as markers along the spiritual path. What I've seen in myself and others is that when we get quiet enough, we discover that love is our nature. We're naturally loving, we're naturally kind and generous and caring. This stuff is built into the universe. It just feels right. It feels good at the gut level to love. So when we're not busy doing other stuff or confused about how to get our satisfaction, then we sit in that default mode where love is really all there is.
What happens to you when you switch, when you gain the insight? Because this is something that has happened to me as well. That you discover, I love myself.
Mm.
What happens to you? What happened to you? What happens to you?
I don't feel like there was a single moment for me, brother, where a switch kind of flipped like that. It was more of a gradual thing for me. But over time, I was more accepting of myself. First of all, I remember a particular walk home that was memorable, where I just allowed myself to think whatever I was thinking. And it was like a row of dominoes falling over. Layers and layers of thought that I had habitually restricted. I had these deep beliefs that I shouldn't think in certain ways. That on that walk home, I just let it roll. And that was tremendously liberating. And that was the beginning of the kind of acceptance that I began to find. And then I think there were certain things about my personality that I had previously. I recall a number of experiences. I mentioned social anxiety earlier on. Whenever anyone would comment in the negative about my behavior, I would take that really seriously. And I would, greater or lesser extent, press then that behavior, which had led to that negative feedback, which is a pretty natural thing to do, you know. But as that acceptance grew and grew, or rather as the restriction shrank and shrank, I found that those behaviors could then manifest in healthy ways. So, for example, you know, no one likes to be told no. This was a major challenge for me as a self-employed person. Always been self-employed, and so when I was hesitant to say no in my career, I would always pay the price. And I would hesitate because I'd had experiences earlier in life where people disapproved of me saying no. And then as I accepted that, hey, people aren't going to like it a lot of the time when I say no, that doesn't mean it's wrong. And I found not only was I able to say no, but I was just speaking to someone else about this earlier, actually miraculously, and to my great delight, the better I got at saying no, the less I had to say no. The more firm in my boundaries I was, the less people tested them. And then what I found is I circumvented that whole thing that I was so fearful of earlier in my life, people's disapproval of me, denying them. Circumvented that whole thing because my boundaries were firm from the beginning. Now, I would say part of this is just growing up. But then we could also say in the other direction, well, some grown-ups never even learn to erect healthy boundaries. It's all fascinating stuff. But that's one example of what that acceptance and self-love started to look like. My boundaries are, I deserve to have boundaries, right? But I'll tell you a characteristic of that whole development and any others is there was never this feeling, when I say I deserve to have boundaries, that was always accompanied by the realization everyone deserves to have boundaries. So it was always impersonal. Whatever self-love came was always rather more a holistic love, impersonal. This is everyone's nature, and everyone deserves this kind of love.
My experience, now I'm going to segue into a different topic in these few minutes that we have left. I really like what you say. It starts with self-acceptance. Because if you ask me, part of the suffering in this world and in myself and in others as well is you avoid your own personal experience. It's so painful to sit with your own pain, with your cravings, with your whatever is stuck in your body, and you do other things in order to mask those pain or the discomfort that you have. Everything from eating to scrolling social media to drinking to name it, working, just to mask it. And I think the pathway to healing is to be with your experience, to accept it, to be open to it, whatever it is. And the next step is not only to accept your own patterns, not only to accept whatever experience you're having, but to accept all of yourself. If you use you here as a word here, I know there are different levels to talk about this, obviously, and I think the next step is, I kind of like these processes, this psychic file. I kind of like myself, right? I even love myself. I'm noticing that it's almost like it's naturally just emerging, naturally popping up almost from within. And that's why I'm also convinced that it's convinced by my own experience that it's not only that we deserve love. I think it's we need love. We need boundaries. We don't only deserve boundaries, we need boundaries as an act of self-love. Somebody asks me sometimes about how can you be compassionate towards others who are having difficult times, or maybe they're doing something against you that are they're being hurtful. And my answer is always, if you identify within yourself that you and that person are not very different, you have the same patterns. If you have sat down and looked at yourself, looked at your own processes, the way you're berating yourself, the habits that you have had, maybe you have broken some of the habits, then you'll notice, okay, we're not so different. So I can extend the compassion that I have for myself to others as well, the love that I have for myself to others as well. So I think the Buddha walked around in India to teach, not because it was only wise, but it was probably because he saw suffering and he was moved to compassion, because he had a way out and he had found it, and he wanted to invite others into that healing journey. And I think that's what both of you and I are doing.
What a beautiful thing.
I have a question to you then. Perhaps this is the last question. You do also teach, in addition to teaching mindfulness, you're the guy who talks about you shouldn't have only one niche, you should talk about a few things that you're good at, right? It's your ikigai, whatever you like, whatever skills that you have and you love doing as well, that can serve others. How do you go from that position of knowing things, being good at things, wanting to share with others, to building an successful online business where you can be completely self-sufficient in monetary sense? What would you say to my listeners?
The first thing to do, brother, is just to start sharing. For anyone who's listening who has something that they know or can do that can benefit others even a tiny bit, then my recommendation is to just start sharing about it with no expectations. Just start a social media profile. I like the idea of just starting a profile on whichever platform you prefer, wherever you consume content the most. Start an account there, because really, if this is your first time considering this, and we're beginning from the beginning here, you don't need to be thinking about growing your account in the first place. You don't need to be thinking about how to reach people or how to do it optimally. You just need to break the seal, so to speak, and just start sharing stuff that you've found valuable. What has worked for you to make your life easier, better? And the beautiful thing about this new economy that we find ourselves in, what's been called the creator economy, is that due to the scale of it, it's 5 billion people logging onto social media every day. Due to that scale, there is a tribe for everyone out here. And so if your thing is you like to do handstand push-ups and that's what makes you happy, then you can earn a living teaching other people how to do handstand push-ups. That's ultra specific, and so there would be, you would speak a bit about general fitness as well before focusing in on giving some kind of a product or service around handstand push-up. But again, you really don't need to be thinking about all of that right now. You just want to start sharing and talking to people like Gabriel and I are talking right now, having these conversations, sharing the results, and immersing yourself in this new world where we're all hyper-connected and able to benefit one another. That's the real meaning of all of this, is that we've never been able to benefit one another like we can now. The potential to do good is unprecedented. So you've probably had this experience, Gabriel, where someone will just DM you out of the blue that you've never seen before, and they'll say, "This post of yours really impacted me. Wow, I never thought about it like that before." That's why we're here. That's why we're here, friends. And that alone is payment enough. But the fact that then if you do enough of this, there will be a small segment of your audience that will want to go deeper. And that's when it becomes a career. You find out how to serve them. You probably serve some people for free to begin with, unless you're coming online to do something that you've already been doing for years. Then a great way to get started is to serve some people for free. I was teaching mindfulness for free for 3 years before I ever thought of building a business around it. So that's a great place to get started as well. And this is why that whole principle of Ikigai is never far from what we're doing out here, right, brother? Is because it needs to be something that we want to do for free. Otherwise, there's no way we're going to have the energy to come out and do that, right? So listeners, if you're in it for the money, I recommend employment or some kind of traditional business. Right? This needs to be your life's work. This needs to be that thing that you're really passionate about. Gabriel and I would sit here and have these conversations for hours and hours with anyone. And so that's really that's when you've got the thing that you can do for the rest of your life. And of course, that's going to mean that only your peers will work as hard at it as you. That's how you are competitive in this creator economy, is when it's just the thing that you want to be doing all day. That's how you become a leader in whatever it is that you're here to do. And it will unfold naturally. We were talking about motivations earlier. When you align with that thing that you care most about, when you redesign your life around it, there's nothing like it, man. It's nothing like it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you so much, Dan, for this conversation. Was there any question that I should have asked. Now these are expectation questions that I should have asked that I didn't ask you, that you want to share with the audience, the listeners.
No, brother. No, I thoroughly enjoyed this. You're a wonderful interviewer. I really enjoyed hearing your perspectives too.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'll be sharing your profile in the show notes on X and your newsletter as well, so that people can find you if they're interested in getting to know you more and to engage with you more at a deeper level as well. So thank you so much
Wonderful.
again. Dan Goldfield.
Thank you.
Wonderful.